Cora Ellery did not cry when they lowered her father into the Wyoming clay. She stood at the lip of the grave with her hands folded and her jaw set, and she watched the ropes pay out until the pine box touched bottom. Behind her, up on the porch of the house she had helped build board by board, her cousin Silas already sat in the dead man's chair. Boots up on the rail, a pencil in his hand and a scrap of paper on his knee, dividing the herd on paper before the first shovel of dirt went down. And in his other hand, turning slow, he had Amos Ellery's carving knife, her father's knife. He was whittling a curl of pine off a stick with it, right there at the graveside supper, like a man passing an idle hour. 30 neighbors had come. The parson too, and when the plates were near empty, Silas stood up off that porch, and he hooked his thumbs in his belt, and he said it plain so every soul could hear. The Ellery name passes to a man. Little Cora keeps her mending. The ranch is mine now. 30 people. The parson. And not one of them spoke a word against him. Cora only looked down at the thing in her hands, a little japanned tin box, black lacquer worn gray at the corners, no bigger than a Bible. She held it against her apron, and she said nothing at all. That night I did not answer him. I saddled a horse in the dark, and I rode to Cheyenne, and I asked the land clerk one question. If you have ever been treated as invisible by your own family, passed over, spoken past, handed the loft while a stranger takes the good bed, then this story is for you. Before I go on, do this one thing for me. Subscribe so the next part of the ride finds you. And leave a comment telling me the town you're watching from tonight. I truly want to see how far this old story rides across the country. Go on and do it now. Then come back and sit. And let me tell you how it happened. Now, let me start where a thing like this really starts. Not at the grave. Long before it. My father came to the Dry Fork bottomland with a wagon, 2 horses, and a paper from the government that said if he could hold on for 5 years, the ground would be his. That paper was the whole of it. The homestead law. You filed your claim, and then you had to prove up. That was the word they used. Prove up. It meant you had to live on it, and break it, and make something of it, and show the land office at the end of 5 years that you'd done the work. Then, and only then, they cut you a patent. And a patent was title. Real title. The kind no man could argue with. I was a girl of 11 when we came. My mother was already 3 years in the ground back in Nebraska, so it was Papa and me and nothing else. And I want you to understand something, because it matters to everything that came after. I did the work. Not as a woman does washing in the yard while the men ride. I mean, the work. I dug post holes till my palms wept. I walked behind the plow when Papa's back gave out. I pulled calves in the spring mud with my sleeves rolled to the shoulder. That bottomland knew my hands as well as it knew his. The first winter we lived in a soddy. You young people don't know what that is. A house cut out of the dirt itself, sod bricks stacked into walls, the roof a tangle of grass roots over your head. It leaked mud when it rained, and it crawled with things when it was dry, and it was warm, and it kept us alive. Papa used to say a soddy teaches you humility, because you live inside the very ground you're fighting to own. I didn't find it humbling. I found it cold. But I never said so. We built the frame house the 4th year, hauled the lumber up from the rail at Cheyenne, board by board, and I remember the smell of that pine, so clean and sharp after 4 years of dirt walls. I remember Papa standing back when the last of the roof was on, and he didn't say a word for a long while. Just looked at it. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "We did that, girl, we." He always said we. And the herd grew. Slow at first, then steady. We ran cattle on the open range the way everybody did then, branded them with the Ellery mark, a bar and a leaning E, and we knew every head. Papa had a way with them. He could walk into a bunched herd and read trouble before it started. He taught me that too. He taught me everything he knew. And he never once acted like there was a thing I couldn't learn because I was a girl. That was rare in those days. I know that now better than I knew it then. The 5th year, the papers came through. I'll tell you about the day, because you'll want to remember it later. It was fall. The aspens up the draw had gone to gold. Nate Kobe, our foreman, an old bachelor cowhand who'd thrown in with us the 2nd year and never left, Nate rode in from town with the mail in his saddlebag, and there was an envelope in it from the United States Land Office. Papa took it out to the porch to open it, because I think he wanted room around him for whatever it was going to be. And I watched his face while he read. And his face did a thing I had only seen it do once or twice in all those years. It went soft. His eyes filled up, and he blinked it back the way men of his kind did, and he handed me the paper without a word. It was the patent. The proof. 5 years of our lives, made into law. That night at supper he brought out the little japanned tin box. I'd seen it before, but never thought much on it. He kept a few coins in it. A lock of my mother's hair. He emptied those out into his hand, and he folded the patent careful along its creases, and he laid it flat in the bottom of the box. And then, he said the thing. I want you to hear it exactly the way he said it, because those words held up the whole rest of my life, and I didn't know it. He said, "Your name's on it, girl, not mine." "Yours," I laughed. I thought he'd made some kind of clerk's mistake. I said, "Papa, that can't be right. It's your claim." And he shook his head, slow. "It's right. I had them put it in your name when we filed the proof. If anything ever takes me, I don't want a soul in this territory able to say a word about whose ground this is. The land office don't care who's loudest, Cora. It don't care who's a man and who ain't. It cares whose name is on the patent. And that's you." He tapped the lid of the box shut. "You remember that. Whatever comes." I said something foolish. I said, "Nothing's going to come, Papa," because I was young, and he looked strong to me, and the harvest was in. He just smiled and set the box up on the mantel, where it sat for years gathering the same dust as everything else, and neither of us spoke of it again. I let it slide clean out of my mind. That was my mistake, and it was almost the only one I got to make. Because things did come. The trouble started with a cough. Just a cough. That first winter after the patent, and I paid it no mind, and neither did he. But it deepened, and it stayed, and by the time the bad weather came the following year, it had teeth in it. That was a killing winter, the worst any of us had seen. The snow came in October, and it did not let up. We lost cattle by the score. You'd find them standing dead where they'd frozen against the drift fences, or heaped in the coulees where they'd bunched for warmth and smothered. Every rancher on the Dry Fork bled that winter. We bled worse than most, because Papa couldn't ride out in it, and I couldn't be everywhere at once, and Nate was one man getting on in years. When the thaw finally came, and we counted what was left, it was thin. Too thin. We'd lost near half the herd, and a ranch runs on the calves it can sell, and there weren't going to be enough. Papa did the sum at the kitchen table with his reading spectacles down on his nose, and he was quiet a long while, and then he said we'd have to see the bank. So we rode to the Cattlemen's Trust in Cheyenne, the two of us, and Papa sat across a broad desk from a man in a collar and asked for money against the ranch. $1,900. That was the figure. It sounds small to you now, I expect. It was a fortune then, and it was exactly what we needed to buy feed and stock enough head to carry us to a better year. The bank man wrote it all in a ledger and slid a paper across for Papa to sign, and the terms were plain. The note would come due, and there'd be a stretch of days to pay it, 60 days, once they called it, and if it wasn't paid, the bank could take the ground to settle it. I remember Papa's hand on the pen. It shook a little. He was ashamed, I think, to owe against the land we'd proved up free and clear. But he signed, and he took the money, and we bought the feed and the young stock, and we rode home. And going back up the Dry Fork Road with the wagon full, he said to me, "This is the last hard thing, Cora. One good year and we clear it. We've had worse than this." We had. But the cough got worse than that. By the second spring it had him down more days than up. The doctor came out from town. That was $40. $40 we could ill spare, and it bought us nothing but a name for the thing that was killing him and a bottle that eased the coughing at night. Consumption, the doctor called it. He told me straight, out by his buggy where Papa couldn't hear, that there wasn't a medicine on earth for it. He said, keep him warm and keep him fed and keep him easy and let time do what it was going to do. Time did it that summer. I was with him at the end. It was near dawn, the window just going gray, and he had a good spell where his mind was clear and his voice was steady, and he took my hand. He didn't say anything about the ranch. He didn't say anything about the note or the herd or the box on the mantel. He'd said all that already, years back, and he trusted it was done. What he said was, "You were the best hand I ever had, girl." And then, a little while after that, he was gone. And I sat there and held his hand until it went cool, and outside the meadowlarks started up like it was any other morning in the world. I sent Nate to town to fetch the parson and to spread the word, the way you did, and that's how my cousin Silas came to hear of it. Now I have to tell you about Silas, and I'll try to be fair, though it's hard. Silas Ellery was my uncle's boy. My father's brother had gone to Denver years before and done poorly there, and died, and left his son to make his own way. I had met Silas maybe twice in 10 years. Once as a boy at a family gathering back east, and once when he passed through the territory chasing some scheme or other, and stayed 3 nights and borrowed money from Papa when he left. He was 34 now, a big handsome man with a loud easy laugh and a way of filling a room, and I know now what I did not know then, that he was in debt to his neck from gambling, faro mostly, and that he'd been drifting from town to town one step ahead of the men he owed. He arrived the day before the burial, rode up on a hired horse in a good coat, swung down in the yard, and folded me into an embrace before I could get a word out, and told me how sorry he was, how much he'd loved his uncle, how he'd come the moment he heard to help me through this hard time. Family, he said. Family comes when there's trouble. And I was grieving and worn thin, and I'll admit it, a part of me was glad not to be alone in it. I gave him supper. I made up a bed. By the next night, the night we put Papa in the ground, that bed was not the one he was sleeping in. I came in from the barn late, after seeing to the stock, and I found my father's boots outside my father's bedroom door, where a man leaves his boots at night. Silas had moved his things into Papa's room, the big bed, the good one, with the quilt my mother had pieced. I stood in the hall, and I didn't understand it at first, and then Silas came out in his shirt sleeves and saw my face, and he laughed, that easy laugh, and he said, "Now, Cora, it don't make sense for the house to sit half empty. You take the loft. A young woman ought to be up out of the way. Anyhow, it's more proper. More proper. In my own house." And I was so tired, and he said it so warm, like he was doing me a kindness, that I picked up my things, and I climbed to the loft, and I lay in the cold up under the roof. And I told myself it didn't matter where a body sleeps. That was the first of it. Small. Almost nothing. But I have learned that the small ones tell you what's coming, if you'll listen. The next morning I came down, and Silas was at the table with Papa's carving knife in his hand. He'd taken to carrying it. He liked the heft of it, he said, and he was using it to trim a plug of tobacco. And he had a manner about him already, the manner of a man in his own place. Over the next days that manner spread through the whole ranch like a stain in water. He found Del Rooker first. Del was a hand we'd taken on for the season, young and easy-led, and Silas got him aside behind the barn with some coins and a lot of that laugh, and after that, Del answered to Silas. Wouldn't meet my eye. When I gave an order in the yard, Dell would look past me to my cousin to see should he do it. And Silas would nod, gracious, like he was allowing my word to stand, as if it needed his allowing. Then he came to me, where I was mending harness, and he told me, kind as you please, that there was no call for me to be doing men's work anymore. He was here now. I should keep to the house, the cooking and the mending and such. It wasn't fitting, he said, for the mistress of a ranch to be out wrestling a cow in the mud. Mistress of a ranch. He said it like a sugar cube. And I looked at my own hands, hard and brown and scarred from that exact work, the work that had put every fence post in that ground, and I did not say what was in my throat. I have asked myself 1,000 times why I didn't. I think it was this. I still believed, down deep, that decency would win out, that these were errors, and that when the shock of grief passed, the right of the thing would settle itself, because surely no man could look at all I'd done and mean to take it. I believed people were decent. That was my blind spot, and Silas found it faster than I did. The worst of those quiet days, the one that Nate Kobe carried in him after, was the branding. Come the turn of spring, we had calves to mark, and marking calves is how a ranch says what's its own. I went out that morning to the branding fire same as every year of my life, and Silas was already there, and the iron heating in the coals was not the Ellery bar and leaning E. It was a new iron. His iron. Some mark he'd had made in town, a lazy S, and he was directing Nate to run the spring calves under it, every calf on the place, taking Silas Ellery's brand. Nate looked at me across that fire. Old Nate, who'd been with us since the soddy days, who'd stood in the land office the day we filed, and heard the clerk read out whose name went on the proof, though I didn't know yet that he remembered that. Nate looked at me, and his jaw worked, and I could see him waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to lead. Because Nate was not a man of papers and quarrels. He was a man who followed the rightful hand, and he needed me to raise mine. And I didn't. God help me, standing there over my father barely cold. I didn't. I gave a small shake of my head that meant let it go. Not now. And Nate lowered his eyes and branded the calves under Silas's mark, and every hiss of that iron on hide was a word I hadn't said. But Nate remembered it. He remembered all of it. Keep that with you. Now I come to the day that turned the wound into a debt. The graveside supper. It was the custom in that country, when a man was buried, that the neighbors gathered after at the house for a meal, to honor the dead and to hold up the living. Word had gone out, and they came from all up and down the Dry Fork and beyond, 30 of them, near enough, whole families in their Sunday black, and Parson Gill who'd said the words over the grave. They filled the yard and the porch and spilled into the house, and I cooked for them and served them, because that at least was mine to do, and it kept my hands busy so I wouldn't have to think. Silas held court the whole afternoon, standing among the men with a plate in his hand, telling stories about an uncle he'd barely known, wiping at a dry eye, and I watched the neighbors nod along to him, taking him for what he showed them, the grieving nephew, the man of the family come to shoulder the load. Not one of them knew he'd slept 2 nights and put me in the loft. Not one of them had seen the branding iron. They saw a big, warm, capable man, and they were glad, I think, that poor Amos's girl had someone. The plates were near cleared when he did it. The light was going long and gold across the yard. Silas set down his cup, and he stepped up onto the porch so he stood above the whole gathering, and he raised his hand for quiet. And he got it. 30 faces turned up to him. The parson among them. He spoke about my father a moment, the loss to the country, the fine ranch he'd built, and then his voice changed, went practical, went certain, and he laid it down in front of all of them. Amos left no son, he said. And a spread like this can't run itself, and it surely can't be run by a girl. The Ellery name passes to a man, friends. That's the way of it, and always has been. So I'll be taking up my uncle's work here. Little Cora keeps her mending, and she'll always have a place under this roof. Don't you worry on that account. But the ranch is mine now, and I mean to do right by the Ellery name on this ground. I was standing in the doorway with a dish in my two hands, and I looked out at that yard full of people, my neighbors, folks I'd known all my life, and I waited. I waited for one voice, one man to say, "Now hold on, Silas. That girl's worked this land harder than any hand in the county, and it's her father not 2 hours in the ground, and where's the decency?" I waited for the parson. Nobody said a word. Some looked at their boots. Some nodded slow like it was a sad true thing, the way of the world. Nothing to be done. A few of the women looked at me with a soft pity that was almost worse than the silence. But no one spoke. The quiet stretched out, and it closed over me like water closing over a stone, and I understood in that moment exactly how invisible I was to them. All that work, all those years, and to that yard of good church-going people I was a girl who kept her mending, and my cousin was the man of the ranch, and that was simply how things went. I didn't argue. I couldn't have made a sound if I'd tried. I only reached back, without hardly knowing I did it, to the mantel just inside the door, and I took down the little japanned tin box, and I held it against me the way you'd hold a child. Silas saw me do it. He must have thought it was some keepsake, some woman's sentiment, my mother's hair maybe. He gave me a kind of pitying smile and turned back to accept the sober handshakes of the men, the new master of the Dry Fork Ranch, and I stood in the doorway holding my father's voice in a tin box. "Your name's on it, girl. The land office don't care who's loudest." And 30 witnesses stood in my yard and watched a man take what was mine, and every one of them would remember that they watched. That was what Silas didn't understand. He'd made his claim in front of a crowd. Whatever answer ever came, it would have to come in front of that same crowd. He'd built the stage himself. But I get ahead of the story, because Silas moved fast, faster than a grieving woman was expected to move, and he had reasons I didn't yet know. Within the week, a stranger came riding up the Dry Fork Road in a town suit, a soft-handed man named Halloran, land agent for a big outfit called the Overland Cattle and Land Company. He and Silas walked the property together the whole of an afternoon, Halloran making notes in a little book, the two of them talking low. I served them coffee on the porch, and neither one looked at me twice. But I have good ears, and I heard enough. Halloran's company wanted range, and they wanted it cheap, and a spread whose owner had just died looked to them like fruit ready to fall. And Silas wanted to sell, not to run the ranch, not to do right by any Ellery name. He wanted to turn it into cash and be gone. The figure they landed on, when I pieced it together, made me sick. $6,000. For the Dry Fork bottomland, the house, the herd, the water, for everything Papa and I had bled 5 years to prove up and years more to build. $6,000, a lowball a fool could see, and Silas took it, because Silas needed money the way a drowning man needs air. That night I heard him and Halloran shake on a letter of intent, papers to be drawn, the sale to close in a matter of weeks, and there was one more thing I overheard, standing in the dark of the kitchen with the coffee pot in my hand, that told me the shape of the whole game. Halloran asked, careful, about the banknote. The 1900 against the ranch. Who carried that? And Silas waved it off. Easy. Saeed, that was the girl's lookout. Or the buyer's. Whoever ended up holding the ground could sort it with the bank. He hadn't the first idea. He thought the note was a millstone hung round the neck of whoever owned the land, and he never once stopped to think what it might mean that he did not own the land at all. And never had. He'd told the county I'd gone back east, gone home to family, given it up. He'd sold a ranch he didn't own to a company that didn't check, and hung a debt he didn't understand around a neck that wasn't there. He never read the paper. Not once. All that shouting about the Ellery name, and it never crossed his mind to open a land box and read whose name the government had actually written down. That was his arrogance. And arrogance like that is a door left standing open. I stood in that dark kitchen, and something in me that had been lying down since the day Papa died got up onto its feet. I thought about the box on the mantel. I thought about my father's hand tapping the lid shut, and his voice, so sure. "Your name's on it, girl, whatever comes." I thought about 30 neighbors watching their boots, and I thought, very clear and very cold, that decency was not going to come save me, because I had waited on it and it had stood in my yard and said nothing. If the right of this was going to be spoken, I was going to have to speak it. But not with my voice. Silas had a bigger voice than mine, and always would, and voices didn't matter here. Papa had told me what mattered, a name on a paper in a government book. That night, after the house had gone quiet and Silas was snoring in my father's bed, I climbed down from the loft in my stocking feet. I took the Japan tin box down off the mantel, and I sat at the kitchen table with a stub of candle, and I opened it for the first time in years. My mother's lock of hair. A few old coins, and under them, folded along its creases, gone soft at the folds from all its years of sitting, the patent. I unfolded it, and I turned the candle to it, and I read it slow, every line of that government hand, all the way down to the name of the person to whom the United States had deeded the Dry Fork bottomland, free and clear, forever. My name. Cora Ellery. Just as he'd said, I folded it back and I put it in the box, and I held the box in both hands, and I sat there a long while in the dark, and I made my plan. There was the patent, and there was the note. Title in one hand, debt in the other. To be truly free of Silas and Halloran both, I would need to hold them both. And that meant Cheyenne. The land office, to make the title into something no man could wave away, and the bank, to deal with the $1,900 before it could be used as a rope on me. I did not wake Silas to tell him. I did not tell Nate, not yet. Before first light I went to the barn quiet as I could, and I saddled the sorrel mare, and I slipped the tin box into my saddlebag wrapped in a shirt so it wouldn't rattle. The sky to the east was just going the color of an old bruise. I led the mare a good way down the road on foot before I mounted, so the hoofbeats wouldn't carry to the house. And I want you to see me there, in that gray dawn, a young woman, on a horse, on an empty road, with her whole life folded in a tin box behind her, riding off to ask a clerk a question. Because between me and Cheyenne there was a hard ride and worse weather, and I did not yet know the half of what stood in my way. But I knew where I was going, and for the first time since they put my father in the ground, I was not waiting on anyone's decency but my own. I turned the mare's head toward the mountains, and I put my heels to her, and I rode. The road to Cheyenne was 3 days of hard country, and the sky did not favor me on any of them. The first day was fine. The mare had bottom, and I made good time along the Dry Fork. Then east where the land flattened, and the grass ran silver in the wind. I did not push her too hard. A horse ridden into the ground is no use to anyone, and I had a long way to go. I ate cold biscuit in the saddle, and I watered her at the creeks, and I did not think about Silas sleeping in my father's bed. I thought about the clerk. I thought about the one question. The second day the weather turned. You know how it comes in that country. Clear at dawn, and by noon there is a wall of gray building over the mountains, and it moves faster than a horse can run. I smelled it before I saw the worst of it. That cold, wet, metal smell. Then the wind came flat across the grass and laid it down, and the first rain hit me sideways, and inside of 10 minutes I was soaked to the skin and shivering. I got down, and I led the mare into the lee of a cutbank, and I waited. There was nothing else to do. The lightning walked along the ridgeline, and the thunder came right behind it, close enough to feel in my chest. The mare shook and rolled her eyes, and I held her head, and I talked to her low, the way my father talked to a frightened animal. Easy, easy now. It passes. Everything passes. It did pass, near dark, but it cost me half a day, and it cost me more than that. The third morning the mare was favoring her off for. I felt it the moment I mounted, that little hitch, that dropped beat in her stride. I got down and I lifted the hoof, and there was no stone, no crack I could see. But the heat was in it, and she flinched when I pressed the frog. She'd come down wrong in the mud, or wrenched it in the dark. It didn't matter how. What mattered was I had a lame horse and a good many miles still to make, and a land office that a clerk locks at the end of the working day whether you are standing at the door or not. So I walked. I walked and led her, and I did the sums in my head as I went, if the office kept the usual hours, if I did not lose the road, if the mare did not go dead lame and leave me afoot entirely. It was a near thing, and I knew it was a near thing, and I will tell you the truth, there was an hour that afternoon, footsore and cold and alone on that empty road, when I came close to sitting down in the grass and letting it all go. Let Silas have it. Let him sell it. What was one girl against a cousin and a company and 30 neighbors who'd already made up their minds? Then I thought of my father's hand on that patent, his careful hand, writing my name where it counted. And I got my feet under me, and I kept walking. Cheyenne came up out of the plain in the last light. The rail yard, the water tower, the low brick and false front buildings, all gone gold and then gray as the sun dropped. I found the land office by asking a man on the street, and I came to its door with maybe a quarter hour to spare, leading a limping horse, mud to my knees, my hair in strings, the tin box wrapped in a shirt in my saddlebag. The door was still open. A lamp was lit inside. There was a young man at the counter, closing a great ledger, and he looked up at me over a pair of spectacles with a look that said the day was done, and here was one more trouble walking in out of the dark. But he did not turn me away. I have thought about that since. A meaner man could have said, "Come back tomorrow," and tomorrow I could not have spared. But he did not. "We're near to closing," he said, "but you've come away, by the look of you. What is it you need?" "My name is Cora Ellery," I said. "My father proved up a homestead on the Dry Fork bottomland. Amos Ellery. The patent came through some years back. I need to know whose name is on the record, and I need a copy I can carry that no man can call a forgery." He set the ledger down. "Ellery," he said. "Dry Fork." He looked at me a moment longer, and something in my face must have told him this was not idle. "Sit down, Miss Ellery. You look about done in. Let me pull the book." His name was Elias Thorne. He went into the back, and I heard him moving among the shelves, and he came out with a great heavy volume, the tract book, and he laid it open on the counter and ran his finger down the columns. I stood and watched his finger move. My whole life was in the travel of that finger down a page. It stopped. "Here," he said. "Township, range, section, homestead entry, final proof accepted." His finger held on the line. "Patent issued to the recorded claimant. One name." He looked up at me. "Cora Ellery." I had read it myself by candlelight in my father's house. I had held the paper in my own hands. But to hear a stranger read it out of the government's own book, in the government's own office, a man with no reason on this earth to lie to me, that was a different thing. That went through me like warm water. I put my hand on the counter to steady myself. "You're certain," I said. "The tract book does not lie, Miss Ellery. It's the record of the United States." He studied me. "Someone's told you different." "My cousin," I said. "He's telling the county the ranch is his, by the Ellery name. He's arranging to sell it." Elias Thorne took off his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose, and when he spoke plain, the way a man speaks who has seen this before and is tired of seeing it. "Then let me tell you how it stands, so you carry it right. A proved-up homestead patent is federal title. It is the strongest paper there is on land in this territory. It is not a will. It is not a family matter. It is not decided by who is the eldest, or who is the man, or who shouts loudest at a supper table. The land was deeded by the United States to one person, and that person is the patentee of record, and that is you." He tapped the book. "A claim by kinship means nothing against it. The Ellery surname means nothing against it. Your cousin can sign whatever he likes with whoever he likes. He is selling a thing he does not own, and any sale he makes is worth exactly the paper it's written on, which is to say nothing at all." "He doesn't know," I said. "He's never read the patent. He thinks because my father's dead and I'm a woman, it falls to him." "Then he is a fool," Elias Thorne said, "and fools are expensive to be kin to. I'll make you a certified copy under seal. You take it back, and you show it, and no honest man can argue with it, and a dishonest one hasn't a leg to stand on." He did it right then, though the day was long over. He copied it in his fine clerk's hand, and he pressed the seal into it, and he signed it as the recording officer, and he blew on the ink and folded it, and handed it across the counter to me. I have kept that copy all my life. I have it yet. "There's one thing more," I said. "There's a note. My father took a loan at the Cattlemen's Trust after a bad winter. $1,900. It's coming due. My cousin means to leave it hanging over the land, or over me." Elias Thorne nodded slow. "A debt follows the land, if the land secured it. Whoever holds title inherits the note. That's you. Now." He was quiet a moment. "If it were me, Miss Ellery, I'd clear it before I showed my hand. A woman holding clear title and a paid note is a fortress. A woman holding clear title and a debt is a woman someone can still reach." I had a hard cash box of my father's hidden under the puncheon floor at home, and there was the wool clip coming, near 1,000 pounds of it, and I had done my own sums on that road in the rain. It would be tight, but it would reach. "I mean to clear it," I said. "Tomorrow, first thing, at the trust." "Then you'll do all right," he said. He looked at me, mud and all. "Get yourself dry and fed. And Miss Ellery, you rode a hard road for that paper. See that it was worth it." I did clear it. The next morning, the moment the Cattlemen's Trust opened its doors, I was inside. I brought what I had, and I arranged the rest against the wool, and I paid down that $1,900 to the last 40, and I took a note in return that said, "Paid, in full, satisfied," signed by the bank's own man. 2 papers now. Title in one hand. The debt closed in the other, just as I'd planned it in the dark on the night my father lay unburied. Then I bought a fresh horse, and I doctored the mare and left her stabled to mend, and I rode home to my own ranch the long way, thinking every mile of how to play a hand I already held, because here is the thing I understood: riding back. I could have galloped up to that porch and thrown the patent in Silas's face and been done. But 30 neighbors had watched him claim my ground and had said nothing. The wound was public. The healing had to be public too. He'd done it before all of them. He would be undone before all of them, in the same place, at the same table, and they would all watch, and this time nobody would look at their boots. So I came home the dutiful niece. I want you to see it, because it was the hardest play acting I have done in my life. I rode in, and I was quiet, and I was tired, and I let Silas think I had been off crying somewhere, or begging kin back east, or whatever tale he told himself. He was greatly pleased with me. He had a way of being pleased with you that was worse than his anger. He clapped me on the shoulder like I was a hand who'd come around, and he said, "Now, Cora, this is better, isn't it? Everybody in their place." And I said, "Yes, Silas," and I went and put my things in the loft where he'd sent me, and I set the tin box back on the mantel in plain sight, because the safest place for it was where he'd never think to look, right under his loud nose. And I began, quiet, to gather my witnesses. I got Nate Kobe alone in the barn the second evening. Old Nate, who'd been at the land office years back when my father filed, who knew whose name went on that proof and had kept it in his slow, careful heart all this while, waiting on somebody to ask him. I asked him. I showed him the certified copy under the lantern. He read it, moving his lips, and when he got to my name his jaw worked and his eyes went bright, and he took his hat off, which Nate Kobe did not do indoors or out for any living man. "I was there," he said. "I stood right there when Amos signed the proof. I knew it, and I said nothing, and I let that jackanapes sit in Amos's chair, and I'm ashamed, Cora, I'm shamed to the bone. You had no paper to point to," I said. "Now we do. I need you to stand for me, Nate, not yet, when I say. Before all of them." "I'll stand," he said. "You point me where." I got 2 of the neighbors the same way. Quiet, at their own places. The ones I judged had voices the others listened to. I showed them the seal. I asked them to come to a gathering to settle my father's affairs, the day before Halloran's sale was set to close. I did not tell them all of it. I told them enough. And I saw in their faces the thing I had ridden 3 hard days to earn. I saw them believe me. Silas, meanwhile, played into every part of it. He tore up my father's desk looking for a will. I heard him at it one night, the drawers pulled and the papers thrown, and I lay in the loft and I let him. In the morning he was in high color, and he told Del Rooker, loud enough for me to hear, that he'd searched and there was no will, not a scrap, and everybody knew what no will meant. It meant the land fell to the nearest man. To him, he said it like a lawyer, though he'd never opened a law book in his life. He never once climbed up to look in the tin box on the mantel. Why would he? It was an old woman's keepsake box. It held a lock of hair and a few coins. He'd looked in it his first day and dismissed it. He never looked again. And every day he didn't look, I breathed a little easier, and I hated a little harder, and I waited. Then, Halloran's man came out to see the ranch he thought his company was buying, and Silas near tripped over himself showing it off. I was on the porch when the fellow, a dry stick of a clerk in a town coat, asked the natural question. He asked to see the title. He wanted to see the paper before the closing, as any buyer's man would. And Silas bluffed. I watched him do it. He got large and hearty, and he said the papers were all in order, all with the lawyer, and there'd be a formal reading and signing before the sale, everything proper, everything above board. The clerk did not much like it, I could see, but Silas was so loud and so sure that the man let it go, and made a note in his little book, and said he'd expect the title at the closing. I came forward then, calm as milk, and I said, "The papers will be read tomorrow evening, sir. My cousins arranged a gathering to settle my father's affairs. All the neighbors will be there, and the parson. You and Mr. Halloran are most welcome. Everything will be made plain." Silas beamed at me. He thought I was helping. He thought I was his good, quiet Cora, smoothing it over. "There, you see," he said to the clerk. "All in order. My cousin's got a level head, for a woman." "Thank you, Silas," I said. That was the last night he was easy in his mind. The next day, the nerves got into him. The sale was close, the money was close, and a man that close to money he hasn't earned starts to see shadows. Along toward dark he came to me with a paper of his own, a quitclaim. He called it, that he'd had drawn in town, that would sign over whatever right I had in the place to him, clean and legal, before the closing. He wanted my mark on it that night. "Just to settle it," he said. "Just so there's no muddle at the reading. You understand, Cora, a woman can't rightly hold a working ranch. Sign this, and I'll see you taken care of. There's a good girl." And then, casting about the room for a pen and an ink pot, his eye fell on the mantel, on the tin box, and some idle thought crossed his face, a place he hadn't looked, a place papers might be, and he reached for it. I was in the doorway. I saw his hand go out. I did not stop him. I stood in the door, and I watched my cousin Silas take my father's land box down off the mantel and pry up the lid. and root past the lock of my mother's hair and the few old coins, and pull out the one folded paper at the bottom. I watched him unfold it under the lamp. I watched his lips start to move, the way a man's do when he reads slow. He read the top line aloud, half to himself, the government hand. The fine words. Patent, United States, and then the name of the person to whom the land was deeded, free and clear, forever. He read my name. Cora Ellery. And he did not understand it. That was the thing. He held the whole ruin of his scheme in his two hands, and he read it out loud, and it did not go in. He looked up at me with his mouth a little open, and he said, This is your father's old. And then he stopped, because there was no name on it but mine, and even Silas could not make it say Amos. Put it back, Silas, I said gently. You'll want it in the box for tomorrow, when everyone can see. He put it back. His hands were not steady. I think, that night, he still believed he could talk his way clear of it. He did not yet know he was already off the edge, and only the ground was missing. The next evening they came. The same 30. The same wagons and buckboards in the yard, the same faces coming up onto the same porch where my father's supper had been laid the day we buried him. Parson Gill in his black coat. Nate Kobe by the door with his hat in his hands. Del Rooker hanging back, uneasy now, sensing the wind had changed, and Halloran himself, the land agent, a big soft-handed man in a good coat, with his dry clerk beside him and a fold of closing papers under his arm, come to buy a ranch. Silas stood at the head of the table where he'd carved the funeral roast, and he was going to make it his coronation. He called them all to quiet. He thanked them for coming to settle poor Amos's affairs. He had the look of a man about to be handed $6,000. And I stood up from my place, and I set the japanned tin box on the table in front of them all, right where Silas had carved the meat, and the porch went still. Before my cousin says any more, I said, There's a paper ought to be read. My father kept it in this box. I'll read it, if you'll allow me, so there's no question who read it or what it said. Silas started to speak. I opened the box before he could, and I took out the certified copy under its seal, and I unfolded it, and the neighbors leaned in to see the government seal pressed into the corner, and Silas's voice died in his throat. I did not shout. My father never shouted about that box. I read it out plain, every line of the government hand, all the way down. And then I looked up, and I looked at Silas, and I said the thing I had carried 300 miles and back to say. Read the name, Silas. My father's blood built this ground. He broke it and fenced it and near died of the work, and I broke it beside him since I was a girl of 11. But the government did not deed it to the loudest man at the table. It deeded it to me. Cora Ellery. My name. It's been my name on this land for years, and you've been standing in my father's chair selling ground you never owned for one day of your life. I passed the paper to Parson Gill, and he read the seal, and he passed it to the neighbor beside him, and it went hand to hand around that whole company. The certified copy with the United States seal on it, and I watched 30 faces change. I watched them do the arithmetic. I watched the shame they'd carried since the funeral turn around and find its right owner, and settle on him where he stood. Elias Thorne had told me a proved-up patent was the strongest paper there is. It was strong enough to be read on a porch by lamplight and turn a whole crowd in one turning. Halloran was on his feet. He had gone the color of tallow. He was a company man, and a company man's first thought is always for the company, and he saw in one instant that he had come to buy a ranch from a man who had no more right to sell it than the parson's mule. He snatched the letter of intent out of his clerk's hand, the letter Silas had signed, the sale that was to close in the morning, and he tore it once and twice, and let the pieces fall on the table among the supper things. There's no sale, he said, hoarse. There's no sale here. Ellery, you've near made my company a party to a fraud. He rounded on Silas, and there is no wrath like the wrath of a man who has been made a fool of in front of witnesses. You had no title. You sat there and dickered a price on land you didn't own. Then he turned to me, and I will give him this. He was quick to see where his bread now lay. He put on a softer face. Miss Ellery, clearly the ground is yours, free and clear. My company would take a lease. Grazing rights, fair terms, cash money, more than you'd make working it yourself. We could. No, I said. Just the one word. He waited for the rest of it, and there was no rest of it. His clerk was already down on his knees under the table, gathering up the torn pieces of the letter of intent and folding them into his pocket. And Halloran shut his mouth and picked up his hat, and he was gone off my porch and into his buggy inside of 5 minutes. His company bought a dryer Section 2 valleys over that summer, I heard, and lost their shirts on it. But that is getting ahead. That left Silas. He was still standing at the head of the table, and the paper had gone all the way round and come back, and it lay in front of him now, my name on it face up in the lamplight, and he had run clean out of loud. But he had one card, the only card he'd ever held, and in his desperation, he played it again. He drew himself up, and he said it, the very words, the guillotine line he'd dropped on me over my father's grave. The Ellery name, he said, passes to a man. Little Cora keeps her, and a neighbor down the table, an old rancher named P.D. Voss, said it back to him. Quiet, almost kind, like a man repeating the punchline of a joke that had stopped being funny. Passes to a man, does it? P.D. said. Reads pretty plain to me, Silas, reads Cora. And somebody laughed. Just one short breath of a laugh, quickly stifled. But it was enough. The same silence that had closed around me the day of the funeral, the silence of 30 people looking away while I was robbed, that silence turned all the way around and closed around Silas, and this time it was not shame he was drowning in. It was contempt. They had let him do it once because they didn't know. Now they knew, and not one of them would meet his eye, and a man cannot stand long in a room where nobody will look at him. Then I brought out the last paper. I laid it on the table beside the patent, the note from the Cattlemen's Trust. Paid, in full, satisfied. You've been telling the county you saved this ranch, I said, that you'd carry my father's debt like a man. There's the debt. Silas, $1,900. I rode to Cheyenne and I paid it myself, from my father's own cash box and the wool that's mine off my own sheep. You never carried $1 of it. You never owned 1 acre. You came to help, and you stayed to steal, and there is not one thing left in this whole valley that is yours except the horse you rode in on. I did not put him off myself. I turned to Nate Kobe by the door, and to P.D. Voss and one other, and I said, "Would you see my cousin to the property line?" Nate put his hat on. That's how you knew Nate meant a thing. He put his hat on to do it. He and the 2 neighbors came round the table, not rough, not hurried, and Silas looked from face to face for one that would take his part. And there was none. Del Rooker had already slid out the door into the dark. Silas gathered up his coat, and his color was bad, and he said something about lawyers, about kin, about how this wasn't finished. But it was finished. Everybody on that porch knew it was finished. They walked him down through the yard in the last of the light, 3 men and my cousin, out to the gate at the property line, and they put him through it on foot and shut it, and Nate stood there with his hand on the top rail until Silas had gone off down the road in the dark toward town, his horse led behind him, his debt his own, his scheme in torn pieces in another man's pocket. He was gone. Off my land, before the same 30 pairs of eyes that had watched him take it. I did not feel the way I thought I would feel. I had ridden all that way with a hard, cold thing in me, expecting some rush of triumph when it came. It did not come like that. It came quiet. It came like setting down a weight you have carried so long you forgot it was a weight, and standing up straight, and finding you can breathe. There was more to do that night, and I am glad there was, because it was better work. I stood up before those neighbors, and I named Nate Kobe foreman of the Dry Fork for good and all, and I put it in writing then and there with the parson to witness. A signed share of the wool clip every year for as long as he wanted the place, and Nate had to go stand out in the dark a minute, where a man's face is his own business. I thanked P.D. Voss, who'd been the first to speak up, and I meant it, and I told him so in front of everyone so he'd have it before witnesses the way the wound had been made before witnesses. And when they'd all gone home, and the yard was empty, and the lamp was burning low, I found my father's carving knife where Silas had left it stuck in the block by the hearth. The one he'd whittled with at the graveside supper like the ranch was already his. I pulled it out, and I wiped it, and I set it back in the block where it belonged, handle up, my father's knife in my father's house. And I went up to my own bed, not the loft. And I slept. 6 months on, and I will leave you here, on the porch, because that is where the story ends and the living begins. It is first light over the Dry Fork bottomland. The grass is coming green along the creek, and the cottonwoods are leafed out, and the water is talking over the stones the way it did the morning my father and I first drove our stakes into this ground. My coffee is cooling on the porch rail. Down in the near pasture, the spring calves are working the grass by their mothers, and every one of them wears my brand now. My own mark that I registered in the county book in my own name, Cora Ellery, sole owner of record, the same as the land. The tin box is on the mantel inside, where it has always been, but the patent's not folded in the bottom of it anymore. I had it framed behind glass, and it hangs on the wall where the morning sun comes across it, so that anyone who walks into my house sees whose land they're standing on before they've got their hat off. Word drifts back sometimes, the way it does in cattle country. They say Silas is down in Deadwood, dealing faro in a tent, and that he still tells anyone who'll buy him a drink that he owns a ranch up in Wyoming, a fine big spread on the Dry Fork that his ungrateful cousin cheated him out of. I don't trouble myself about it. A man who'll lie to a whole valley will surely lie to a whiskey tent. And Halloran's company, the one that was going to be so clever and buy a widowed girl's ranch out from under her for $6,000, they bought that dry section over the next range instead, the one that looked so good on a map and had no water in July, and I'm told they lost a great deal of money on it and pulled up stakes for Montana. The land office does not care who is loudest. My father said that, over supper, years ago, and I thought little of it at the time. I think about it now, most mornings, with my coffee going cold and the light coming up gold across the framed paper on the wall. He never raised his voice about that box. Not once in his life. He didn't argue, and he didn't fight, and he never once told me I'd have to be ready for a day like the one that came. He just took the patent out of the land office with his careful hand, and he wrote my name where it counted, and he put it in a tin box on the mantel, and he trusted that when the loud men came, and the loud men always come, the quiet paper would be enough. It was enough. If you've watched this far, tell me the town you're watching from down in the comments. I'd like to know how far my father's story has ridden.